Hi folks, this is Joe Porak, and I put together this video to go into a bit more depth on what we are calling in Strategy 2 the better off test when acquiring, merging, or diversifying organically. This video is meant to supplement the excellent discussion of the better off test in the assigned Anon reading on related diversification. The better off test is the core of the practical concept of synergies, or what are called in the academic strategy literature economies of scale and scope. Strategy 1 classes took a value-based perspective on competitive advantage, and this perspective extends nicely to corporate strategy by providing an exact definition of economies of scale and scope, or synergies, or being better off via a diversification move. So let's get started. On this slide, I've depicted the value spreads of two firms, Acme and Omega, competing in the same market. They are rivals, essentially, in that market. We know from the value-based view that each firm is creating a value pie that is equal to their respective willingness to pay minus opportunity costs, and are bargaining with buyers over the price of their products and or services, and with suppliers over the cost of their supplies. For purposes of our discussion, we don't really have to set precise numbers on willingness to pay or opportunity cost, because we're interested in Acme and Omega's willingness to pay opportunity cost spread relative to each other and relative to what they would be if one of the firms was acquired or merged with another. Let's set the overall Q in the market as Q sub T equals 200 units. We know from Strategy 1 that the value captured by both Acme and Omega is equal to their respective price minus cost times Q profit wedge. We can immediately see from their respective value spreads that Acme has a significant competitive advantage over Omega. For reasons that we don't have to be too precise about here, Acme has managed to lower its supplier opportunity costs sufficiently that it is able to negotiate lower cost for its supplies and thus can price lower than Omega in the market. Because Acme's prices are lower, we can assume that Acme has captured the bulk of Q equals 200 buyers, let's say 175, with Omega lagging considerably with only 25. A situation like this is quite common in many industries. It's called in Strategy 1 a low-cost strategy for competitive advantage on the part of Acme. In retailing, for example, a good analog would be to equate Acme with, say, Walmart, and Omega with a regional supermarket chain struggling to match the low prices of Walmart supercenters. There has been a fair amount of consolidation of regional supermarket chains over the last decade, seeking to create economies of scale and scope in their quest to compete effectively with Walmart. Now let's say that a larger firm that we'll call Big Corp enters the scene, evaluates Omega's disadvantaged position relative to Acme, and sees an opportunity to acquire Omega from its owners for a bargain price. There are a lot of prima facie benefits to being an acquirer in this situation. Big Corp will grow its size in terms of employees and top-line revenues, 25 times P, in fact, to be precise, and it is important to note that the single best predictor of managerial salaries is the size of the company that the managers manage. So acquiring Omega will likely lead to a bump in managerial salaries. If it's a publicly traded firm, the revenue growth might also lead to an increase in the firm's stock price. If it's a privately held firm, the increased cash flow from Omega can be used to fund any number of managerial ambitions and can fuel further Big Corp growth. But will there be any bottom line or profitability benefits for either Big Corp or for Omega? Minimally, if Omega's profit wedge, P minus C times Q, is larger than the wedges of the other Big Corp divisions, Consolidating Omega into the firm might incrementally widen the consolidated wedge, although one has to factor in the price that Big Corp paid for Omega to get this benefit, and it's unlikely to be a large benefit in the short run at least. Investors in Big Corp might be happy with the increase in stock price from the incremental revenue growth, and Big Corp managers might be happy with their salary increases. But would this acquisition pass the better off test that corporate strategy theory tells us is one of the key desiderata in a diversification move? Here is where value-based reasoning can help us to get very precise with respect to the effects of a merger or acquisition. We can say that Omega would be better off in being acquired by Big Corp if being acquired increases its added value in its core markets. In other words, being acquired either increases the willingness to pay of Omega's buyers and or decreases the opportunity costs of Omega's suppliers. In short, our better off test demands that the acquisition of Omega increases the competitive advantage of Omega, that is, its added value in the marketplace relative to other rivals. Some strategy experts go even further by arguing that the better off test demands that acquiring Omega should also increase the competitive advantage of at least one of Big Corp's existing divisions. In other words, both Omega's and Big Corp's competitive advantage, i.e. added value, should be expanded in the acquisition. For purposes of this video, we'll just focus on applying the test to Omega. In order to apply the better off test to Omega's acquisition by Big Corp, we need to examine the value spread of Omega before and after being acquired. We know what the pre-acquisition spread looks like, and we know that Omega was competitively disadvantaged because of it. But let's assume we are now 5 years after the acquisition has occurred, and Omega's spread now looks like this. The same as before. Moreover, Omega has not grown beyond its pre-acquisition Q of 25. According to our better off test, Big Corp's acquisition of Omega has added no value to Omega's business. Omega has no more added value in the marketplace 5 years post-merger than it did as a standalone business, and its competitive position relative to Acme has not changed. Despite the ancillary benefits that might have accrued to Big Corp managers and investors by acquiring Omega, we can conclude that Big Corp's acquisition of Omega 5 years out has failed the better off test and was largely a mistake. We'll give it a thumbs down. Unfortunately, there was probably a good probability that Omega might have been able to improve its competitive advantage more as an independent business, or it might have been better off being acquired by another company rather than Big Corp. In order to see this, let's rewind the situation back 5 years and reset Omega as a standalone business with its disadvantaged value spread. Enter another acquirer. Let's call them Smart Corp. Smart Corp is not as large as Big Corp, but its corporate strategy places a heavy emphasis on improving the businesses that it acquires. Improving businesses takes time and deliberation and effort, and they have grown more slowly than Big Corp has. Let's say they are the ones who acquire Omega for the same price paid by Big Corp. After 5 years, Omega's value spread looks like this. We can see that Smart Corp worked with Omega management to find ways to significantly lower the opportunity costs of Omega's suppliers, thereby enhancing Omega's added value in the marketplace and positioning it much more competitively against Acme's value spread. Their lower supplier opportunity costs allowed Omega to lower their prices while still maintaining a healthy P minus C times Q profit wedge and the lower prices have allowed Omega to take 25 more Qs of market share away from Acme in their core markets. In other words, being acquired by SmartCorp has improved Omega's added value and thus their competitive position. We have to give SmartCorp's acquisition of Omega a thumbs up for passing the better off test. One might ask at this point, how could SmartCorp have increased the added value of Omega, its value spread? What's the secret? Here's where internal value chain analysis is useful. During SmartCorp's 5 years of owning Omega, the corporate parent found ways of either sharing resources across the activity systems of Omega and their other business units, or they transferred skills from other businesses to Omega to bolster the skills Omega had prior to the acquisition. Resource sharing could have occurred all along the internal value chain of Omega, but given that the opportunity costs of Omega's suppliers have been significantly reduced from the acquisition, we can expect that the focus was on sharing resources in the inbound logistics and operations areas. For example, sharing inbound warehousing and logistics information technology so that Omega benefited from SmartCorp's more robust and extensive inventory handling and tracking systems. Or SmartCorp might have transferred particularly skilled operations employees from a pre-existing business unit to help shore up Omega's operations to make them more efficient and to pass this efficiency along to suppliers. There might have been many sharing and transfer opportunities, and by implementing them successfully, SmartCorp created real corporate advantage in making Omega better off than it was prior to the acquisition. We have to congratulate SmartCorp's management for being able to detect possible transfer and sharing opportunities when evaluating whether to acquire Omega, and then for successfully carrying through with them once Omega was in their corporate portfolio. This is a diversification success story. Well, that's all I have for you on the subject. This video, the related diversification reading, my lecture notes, and our class discussions on the cases for related diversification provide you with a solid conceptual foundation for understanding economies of scale and scope, or synergies in action. Thank you so much.